how do you make yourself relevant within, this space? And, one day I was just in the studio working, and one of the artists actually came to the studio and he just kind of looked at me and said, like, look, he said, stop trying so hard. He said, like, just work. He said, and it doesn't have to be anything in particular. It doesn't have to be any grand theme or anything like that. He said, just work. And he said, through working, other things come. And through those conversations, it's like other things did come. But what really started off the work was, while I was there, I had to do a workshop with students. And so it was myself and two other visiting artists from India. The artists from India didn't want to do a workshop because it was supposed to be a collaborative thing. The artists from India didn't want to do a workshop, so it was just me doing this workshop. So the workshop started off with about, I think, 10 teenagers. And it should have lasted 1 day. But then that 1 day went on to like 2 days and 3 days, and people just started coming. So, and then the work now started to take on another kind of life. So that became the project I was working on. And by the end of 3 months, we basically had like a small band. And we blocked off the street. And while I was there, I did several other collaborations with other artists. But that main procession, we blocked off the main street. And we had a kind of small carnival. But what happened was, it started like a chain reaction. Because other artists started showing up on the night, doing just random things like random performances and random live works. I mean, it just went, it kind of got out of control. It got so out of control. It got so out of control that, people, from the building across the street, which is something that does not happen in South Africa. I mean, people were coming out of their buildings. People were starting to hang things out their windows. It was crazy. It was really, really crazy. So that was kind of like the first kind of intervention into working with mass in another space, in a different kind of way. The other thing also in South Africa was I did a collaboration with 2 other artists, and we came up with this concept of the polite force. So the polite force is basically a parody of the police. So we got bulletproof jackets, police caps, and we had polite instead of police embroidered on it. And we basically went around the city being polite. Right? And but what was interesting about the project is you saw how people, I guess, their interpretation of how they interact with law enforcement, but as well authority in different kinds of ways. So most of the people we approached, just turned away from us. We had a lot of people coming to us and complaining about things, crimes that are happening. But we were like, we're not the police, we're the polite force. It's like we can't do anything. So they're looking at it, but they're not reading police. But what also happened is that because of this facade, we were able to access spaces that the average citizen would not be able to access. So we were going into government buildings, going into restricted areas like, it's like, okay, we're here. You open a door and you go in and there's like a city official sitting there. You open drawers and you take out documents and you sign things and etc. We were going everywhere and unrestricted. So that whole project was documented and like a short video was done of it. And then I was like, okay, there was some, and even then when I was doing that work, I still wasn't sure about what I was doing or what direction this thing would go. And I think it was about 2 years later, I was back here in Trinidad again. And there was a curator who had just come to Trinidad, and she, well then CCA Center, which was the Contemporary Art Center here, was still up and running. She was doing studio visits, and one day she came to my studio and she saw the work, and she was like, she's like, this is contemporary work, and I was like, well, I mean, as far as I'm just making work, I didn't really, I wasn't thinking about, where to put, like where to situate it or anything like that, which is a bit of a challenge now, because anytime people ask me like, what do you do? It's like, I could say, okay, I'm a mass man. And then there's the whole explanation about what a mass man is. And if I say I'm an artist, it's like, what kind of artist? And then there's a whole explanation of what kind of artist. So there's always this thing I'm balancing. But at the same time, it's interesting because the work changes over time and it evolves from location to location. Because what's important for me to do is that not that it's static, but it evolves over time depending on the location or response to location in which it goes to. So I'm not going to take Trinidad Carnival and reproduce it in Alaska. I'm going to go to Alaska and I'm going to, it's like, what is Alaska? It's like, what's happening here? It's like, how do I respond to what and use the things in Alaska to create a work that people in Alaska can respond to and can identify with. So for the past, I'd say for the past 10 years, I've been working, traveling, making, well, you want to say it's mass, but in a different context depending on from location to location, and finding and experimenting with new materials and ways of doing things, and making new work. Where do I go from there? Just throw out some questions.
Well, what about your current work in Japan?
My current work in Japan. I mean, this last project I did last summer for the Aichi Triennale. The Aichi Triennale is which is fairly new, is the large arts festival in Aichi, Japan, where I live. I live in Nagoya, which is one of the cities in Aichi. And originally they wanted me to do something that responded to the tsunami and the earthquake that happened. But I had done a work previously to that. But I thought it was more important for me to do a work that spoke more about myself, because it was like the first kind of major work of me being there and living there. So I think the work was more about me as an individual now living in this new city and how I'm responding to living in this space. But what was interesting about doing the project is specifically, I think, more than any other location, the challenges of being able to make that kind of so Japan, which is, I'd say a very first world society in many ways, but at the same time, they have very old world ways of thinking, so there are a lot of very traditional systems that are still in place. So there are a lot of things that haven't changed from the Edo era. This is like 500 years ago. So like I wanted to build a structure that was 5 meters high, and you have to go to the police to get permission. So you go to the police and you say like, I want to make this thing 5 meters high, and they tell you no. But they have a festival where they have structures like more than 5 meters high, and then they look at you and they say, well, that was there before, you know, the laws were made, you know, so you can't do it, you know, and it's not traditional, it's not Japanese, you know, so it's finding ways to kind of work around those kind of situations. And it's a very rigid society in the sense where people don't do things unless they are told. So, for the procession, for example, I wanted to use the whole width of the road. They were like, no, I only have one lane. And in that one lane, the people could only walk in rows of 3. They had to move at this pace. The music had to stop at the traffic light. If people are crossing, they have to stop the music because the music might disturb the people that are crossing. It might disturb the people who are crossing the street. They were panicking, like some of the costumes were touching the trees or the sides of buildings. It's like, you can't do, you know, it's like that's a problem because you might damage the tree, you might, you know, scrape the paint off the building.
Yeah, that kind of sound like
you know, which is a very stark contrast, from being here and being able to do basically anything. Well, I mean there are rules here, but everybody breaks the rules. There they enforce the rules, you know. So you know, it's trying to work your way around it and have conversations with people or people in authority who allow you to do more than what you are allowed to do. So, but what was also interesting about the project is this idea of having access to the artist. I mean, here you're in a mass camp, you have the designers there, you're always interacting with the designer. So there I had an open studio basically, where people, so I basically over time created that mass camp type of situation. So for weeks in the beginning, nobody would come into the space. Until eventually one day somebody came in to find out, like, they're passing the CV there every day doing, so it's like, what's going on? And then you tell them, I'm doing this project with Triennale. I say, well, you could come back anytime, you know, and then they come back again, and this time they come back with a friend, and then they come back with another friend. So this whole new kind of dialogue starts happening. And through that, people started, because the thing is, the Triennale is supposed to be this big thing, but nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
Right? But through this project, people started knowing more about the Triennale because this event is going to be happening.
Okay, so you know, there's this line where people say, Trinity could make it anywhere, right? What do you think? Because you seem like a young guy, right?
Well, try.
Yeah. And you're incredibly successful. What do you think was different about you that you brought to the table that's made you stand out from other artists or other mass men in inverted commas, or besides having the experience of traveling the world and letting that influence your art and letting that influence your concepts? What do you think made you stand out?
I don't know. I don't know, for me, I think like I said, I always wanted to be an artist. And when I started making mass, I think one of the challenges for me with working was, I think in Trinidad, when it comes to mass, I don't think people take it seriously. Like this, like this is our thing. This is a legitimate art form. It has drawing, it has painting, there's sculpture, there's performance, which are all very legitimate art forms. But yet, when it's done here, it's just considered to be this thing that the natives do, a few days of the year. So I think part of my work was that in challenging those traditional, ways of representation, but also challenging the role. I mean, I love drawing, I love painting, but it's also challenging those kind of things as well, and showing that this thing that is mass is also very valid. You know, because I usually, for my work, it's like I always try to create it in a way that it takes on two forms of representation and display. So there's a performative element, but there's also the element, even after the performance, this thing can be in a museum space and interact in the same way that any other contemporary art would function. So, I mean, I've done a lot of work where, I mean, after the procession, when the work is installed, I mean, it takes on a whole new form, but at the same way, there is still that performative element in it, because people are able to interact with the work in a way that they don't normally have access to. You know, so a lot of the work you can actually go in. Like I did a show some years ago where, I mean, I did the installation. I just filled the space with work, and they were all basically costumes that people pick up and put on and move around in this space. So, but then they don't necessarily have to put it back in the location that they found it. So every person that comes into this space, it's constantly
changing.
It's constantly changing. But then there's a situation where people think you're not supposed to touch artwork. You know, which is something that's kind of up for debate. I mean, recently there was a guy. I mean, that was just vandalism, but a guy just picked up an expensive vase by the artist Ai Weiwei. Apparently the vase was cost like something like $1 million US, and he smashed it. You know, in protest of basically Ai Weiwei being able to show in this space, but there are all these other artists in Miami who he thinks are as valid as he is. I mean, okay, I think there were other ways for him to protest, but smashing somebody else's artwork is the same thing. But for me, it kind of goes back to that idea of, you know, this idea of touching artwork and how people interact with it. So I think for me, that was one of the things, you know, maybe challenging the way in which this thing mass is being represented and how it's interpreted by larger groups of people.
That was a good question. What about the thing of mass that you think the Japanese public, you think they understood it? Did you think they understood it as something different? What did they think you were doing?
Well, I think the conversations in the beginning, well, the first thing is anytime they had some kind of they did some kind of PR about it, they would always talk about it in this like carnival, announce it like carnival, and they would exoticize anything as like, no, I say anytime you're doing a press release and thing, please show it to me first. I say this is not about you know, this is not about cultural representation, you know, it's not something to be exoticized. It's like, this is legitimate as, you know, the painting that's being hung by Yoko Ono in the museum or by Yoshitomo Nara in the other space down the street. You know, it's on the same level, or I should say even higher. You know, so it was an educational process along the way and talking to people like all the time about how the work, what the work is and how it should function. But also the work isn't just about me, but it's also representative of this place that I live in, and the people have been living here for years. And so bringing all these other people in and having them invest in this thing, which was one of the things that happened during the whole process. So in the beginning, I mean, nobody would come into this space. By the end of it, I had a situation where the people who